You know, we're talking about corporations are not people and corporate personhood. I think it's really important for us then to actually get down to it and ask, well, what is a corporation? Does anybody know what language that's from, the word corporation? It's Latin. And what does it mean? Body, to give body, right? And the interesting thing is, the reason that it comes from that is because the first corporations ever created by humans, you know, the Neolithic is what, 10,000 years? Right? So this is like 2,000 years. So we actually managed to get along just fine without any corporations at all, just to say. But the first corporations were created by the Roman Republic, not the Roman Empire. By the way, I wish we had time to really investigate what happens when a republic becomes an empire. Something we might want to concern ourselves with. But the Roman Republic was the creator of the first corporations. And with those corporations, here's how it worked. They tried to get individuals to invest money into an effort to do things like build the aqueduct system. You know, this amazing bit of civil engineering where water was run all over the Italian peninsula without any electricity, by the way, right? I mean, we're very clever people. Right? Human beings are incredibly clever primates. We can get this done, right? The roads, that famous road system, all roads lead to Rome. Those roads were built by Roman corporations. Likewise, the Colosseum, the first universities that ever existed, were actually funded by corporations. Private donations coming in to do these, create these institutions. The first hospitals were actually corporations. Anybody see anything similar about hospitals, roads, water systems, universities? Say it louder, ma'am. They're the public good. Here is the idea of the corporation in its essence. You take private money, and you don't do it by taxing and forcing people to do it, but the genius of the corporation is to get private individuals to invest into a public entity. So the idea is that the corporation in its original conception was always used to take private money and do a public good. Now, the modern transnational corporation, though, doesn't look like that, does it? No, the modern transnational corporation took that idea and perverted it. And I want to really be very clear about this. The modern transnational corporation that we know today was created during the 13th, 14th, and 15th century of Europe. You know, for those of you who went to public school the way I did, we know that is the age of discovery, right? I have to put discovery in quotation marks, though, because we know now that the 13th through 15th century was not the age of discovery, was it? No, it was not. It was the age of rape and pillage and plunder and murder. That's what that era was. And by the way, there were people living in Africa, Asia, and later North and South America. They were not lost. They didn't need to be discovered. They weren't discovered. In fact, they were subject to brutal murder and torture and theft. And frankly, the corporation was created in order to facilitate that murder and theft and rape. And I am very explicit about making sure that we understand that the first transnational corporations, the Dutch East Indies Corporation, was created very specifically to go out and colonize, militarily conquer other peoples and steal from them. Likewise, the Africa Trading Company, one of the earliest transnational corporations. Anybody want to guess what the Africa Trading Company traded? No, not slaves. Say it louder. People. I really, folks, the word slave is an abstraction. They were trading people. And may I say, and I say this with sensitivity, they were trading people that at a biological DNA level, just like me. Because on the one hand, we are all descendants, actually, of Africans. The first hominids, the first human beings come out of Africa. But even deeper than that, even more profound than that, ask any scientist, and they will tell you that race does not exist. Race is a construct. Well, why is it? But here's something interesting, and this is hard for white people, and I'll own it myself. Hard for me to really wrap my head around. Race doesn't exist, but racism does. Wow, wow, wow. What do I mean by that? Race, like, look, skin color exists. Pigment exists, but so does hair. Well, I'm bald, but like for those of you who have hair, look around, you'll see lots of different hair color, right? Lots of different eye color. Like pigments exist and ethnicity exists, but race does not exist in the scientific world. But it exists as a construct because we believe it exists. And here's the amazing thing. It doesn't exist, but because enough of us believe it exists, pow, presto changeo, it exists. And the reason that I underscore this is to ask ourselves, well, how did it come into existence, race? Because slavery had always existed since basic civilization, right? But here's the thing. If Sandy and I were in different tribes and we went to war with one another and my tribe conquered his tribe and I had a spear and I put it to his neck, I could enslave Sandy. Now let me ask you something. In that circumstance, what is the legitimate justification for me enslaving Sandy? It's the spear. Nothing else, right? There's no pretense that there's some reason for it. Catch this. Race gets created in order to justify for the first time the idea of enslaving a whole group of people on the basis of pigment alone. Now that is a very powerful, disgusting, and perverse idea, but that is the genesis of the creation and the idea of race itself and the seeds of racism. And frankly, the reason I underscore it is so that we can understand that the modern transnational corporation has its birth not only in colonial conquest, but in facilitating and creating and implementing the kind of racism that we're still dealing with in this country and in fact throughout the world. And the reason I say it is because constructs can change. That's a big, big idea, that constructs can change because it's all a function of us collectively agreeing upon something. And if enough of us challenge constructs, it becomes a challenge for the imagination space. And if we change the imagination space, we change reality. And that's the commitment that I make. And I'll tell you this, the idea of the corporation, let's actually now move forward into the birth of this country, right? How many original colonies in this country? 13. How many of those were corporations, do you think? How about that? The corporations, and by the way, who was the sovereign at that time? What does sovereign mean? I think one of the earlier speakers touched upon sovereignty means who rules, who's in charge. So during the 13th to the 15th century and the colonial conquest of this country, who had the authority? Who was ruling then? The King of England. And where did the King of England get his authority? God. Let me tell you something, folks. You do not get more legitimate if you believe and everybody else agrees with you that your authority to rule comes from God. So here's something that we'll do. Let's do a little thought experiment. This is always fun, at least for me. I'm going to ask you, close your eyes if you will. If you won't close your eyes, at least in your head, just say to yourself, David is the king. And as the king, David Cobb is God's representative on earth, so everything he says must be obeyed. David Cobb is the king, and therefore everything David Cobb says must be obeyed because he is God's representative on earth. David Cobb is the king. Okay, open your eyes. How many of you bought that? I like you, Philip. You're going to go far. Nobody, right? And I could do that mantra all day long, and all you would do is just get annoyed with me. No. Philip was ready. Folks, the reason that no one except for Mayor Stoddard was falling for this was because it's nuts. It's crazy talk, right? I mean, come on. Are you for real? Just because I happen to be born to somebody that God is somehow giving me the authority to make your decisions for you? That's nuts. And yet, 500 years ago, everybody believed it. And if they didn't believe it, they knew to keep their mouth shut, right? I guess what I'm pointing out is that was a construct too. And today we can't even wrap our heads around it. And yet virtually everybody in Western Europe at the time, throughout all of Europe in fact, both Western and Eastern Europe, everybody believed it. So when people tell me we can't change something because it's the way it is, I say, the hell you say. The degree to which and profound changes that have been made throughout human history are stunning. They are stunning. And so the idea of the king having that kind of power and authority is something there's all kinds of political differences that people have, but have you ever met a monarchist in the United States? Like somebody who actually advocates for, I'll tell you what we need to do is reestablish the lineage of the king and the divine right of the king, right? Like nobody, not even the most raving lunatic actually makes that political argument. And yet 500 years ago, everybody believed it was true. Don't tell me we can't make change, right? We know we can. Now, so the king created those 13 colonies as corporations. How? By issuing a charter. And that's very important to understand because the charter basically created, and by the way, it wasn't Massachusetts Commonwealth. The king created the Massachusetts Bay Trading Colony. The king did not create the state of Virginia. The king created the Virginia Company. And Georgia, by the way, was created as a penal corporation. Literally. And by the way, who was brought over to work on that originally? Well, because at the same time of colonial conquest abroad, the aristocracy in Europe were beginning what is now known as the enclosure movement, where people, and follow me here, white people who were indigenous to their own land because they were engaged in hunting, gathering, and horticulture on communally owned forests and savannas, right? Subsisting and producing for themselves. The enclosure movement fenced it up, locked it away, and the ruling elite said, no, this is no longer owned in common. It's now owned by the king or the aristocracy, and those people who once subsisted from horticulture and farming and hunting and gathering on those communally owned lands now had to become wage slaves in a mercantile system. And if they weren't able to get a wage slave job, not work, but just a job, they were subject to being captured, put into prison, and many of them were taken to Georgia to begin working on that penal corporation. Originally, most of the folks working on the plantation of Georgia were actually white. Just a thought, just for us to keep that in mind. Now, and by the way, it's also important that like Massachusetts, that's a construct too, by the way. In other words, it doesn't really exist. I mean, look, the forests existed, the fish that were in the streams existed, the rivers existed, the people who were living there existed, but Massachusetts is just an arbitrary line on a map. That's a construct too. That's the degree to which, and Alan Coburn's comments earlier about our imagination space and what we're thinking about, this is how important it is. What we think ends up influencing what we do. So think about that. So the original 13 colonies were nothing more than corporations, and the king actually said, I will grant the authority to plant, rule, and govern this new area to the governor, who we should really think about, since it's actually the creation is a corporation. That governor is actually a corporate CEO. The CEO that is reporting directly to the king. And by the way, who was the largest? Anybody know what percentage of the British Parliament actually owned shares in the East India Corporation at the time of the American Revolution? 100%. Every single member of Parliament actually owned shares in the East India Corporation. So that might suggest to us that there was a reason why the policies and the Navigation Act and the Stamp Act and so forth were creating and perpetuating this monopoly. So let me tell you something. The American Revolution and the Declaration of Independence, you read that document and it's profound. You know, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people, should read people, all men are created equal, that they are endowed with life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Profound words, but you know what the majority of the Declaration of Independence is? A list of grievances. And those grievances, when you read them one by one, quartering soldiers in our homes, stealing our land, stealing our corn, imposing taxes upon us. Actually, most of the complaints were not actually things that the king was doing directly. Do you know who was doing it? The governor. Another way to say it, the corporate CEO. So stay with me. The American Revolution is not only a rejection of monarchy as a form of rule. It is literally a people's uprising against illegitimate corporate power and authority. Right? You can applaud that. Think about that. That's our legacy. And by the way, when our children when we send school children in elementary school to reenact the Boston Tea Party, I myself was Indian number 3 at Bay Cliff Elementary. Very proud moment. What are our children reenacting? Well, the single most massive example of nonviolent civil disobedience this country had ever seen, to the point of $10 million in today's dollars of property damage, dumping tea not all tea, just the East India Company's tea. And by the way, when some of the folks were trying to steal the tea, others of the revolutionary and the nonviolent civil disobedience activists said, no, we're not thieves, dump that in the harbor. Because this is a political act. We're not stealing, we're in rebellion, and that's different. That's profound. So if the king gets kicked out and is no longer sovereign, then we have to ask, what happens next? I wish we had time to talk about the Articles of Confederation. Steve, could you bring that up? Because the Articles of Confederation, which is the government that was created right afterwards, is profound. But we didn't go to that. Instead, we go to the U.S. Constitution. And I'm going to now, very quickly, and I'll ask, if I boom, y'all can hear me, right? But how about you, sir? Do I need to be right in the microphone for your purposes, or can you hear sufficiently? You can hear, good, because I want to make sure that our friends who are watching us on Access television can watch, because we know that corporate media won't cover this, but people's media like Access will. So thank you for that. So what we're going to do now, folks, very quickly, as a lawyer, any other lawyers in the crowd? Don't be bashful. These are friendly people. So grade my papers and see if I get this about right, because remember that the U.S. Constitution is what creates this country. It's our charter. It's what we're taught in law school, the supreme law of the land. So if we're going to really be serious about a legal system, we need to look at the Constitution and the framework for it. So I'm going to actually give us a quick primer reminding us about how the U.S. Constitution is supposed to operate. How many people besides the lawyers have read the Constitution in the last year or so? Nice? All right, so lots of other people. Y'all grade my papers and see if I get this more or less right. Because I say that there are basically 2 actors in this constitutional framework. The first actor starts. It's the first 3 words of the Constitution. All right, I like that. We got we the people. Uh-oh. I might run out of ink. Kathy, could we get another? They're in the back. So is this for you, just to make sure you got it? Mic on. Oh, okay. Thank you. So there's we the people. The second actor is government. By the way, it's worth pointing out that person or people is used repeatedly in the Constitution. How many times is the word corporation used? 0. Not a cotton-picking time. That might suggest to us, by the way, especially those people who are founder fetishists. You know them, right? We can't do anything about the Constitution unless we know what the founders' original intent is. Well, it might suggest to us that the founders did not intend at all for the corporation. You can just put that there. You did not intend for the corporation to play any meaningful role in the body politic. Hello, Alito, Roberts, all these people who claim that they care about the founders' original intent. If the charter that creates this document, this country, if that entire document never mentions corporations, isn't it clear that corporations should not be playing any meaningful role in politics? Sure that they should engage in business, but they don't have any role in the political process. Just something to ponder. I mean, these right-wingers really get my goat. You know, they're always like, there's no principle. There's actually, their hypocrisy just galls me. It reminds me of the great political philosopher Lily Tomlin. That great political philosopher observed, no matter how cynical I get, it's hard to keep up. But let's go back to our constitutional lesson. We, the people in this document, are described as being free and sovereign. And what does sovereign mean again? Authority. Who rules? We rule. The government is described in this document as being subordinate and accountable. And government is supposed to be subordinate to whom? Government is supposed to be accountable to whom? The people. I like how this is going. That's kind of got a ring to it. We, the people, are free and sovereign, and we, the people, are described in this document as having individual rights. And I think, Mayor Stoddard, that you'll appreciate the individuality, that our rights are individual, because you were talking about how corporations, well, wait a minute, who are they representing? Who are they? Because we, the people, have individual rights, but in this idea, government is not only subordinate and accountable, but government itself has collective duties, not individual, but collective duties for all of us. And by the way, under the whole Western concept of the law, the interchange between rights and duties is a profound difference. I mean, the idea is, in fact, the difference between rights and duties. If I have the right to do something, it means I can do it, and I don't need anybody's permission. I don't need Alan's permission. I don't need this congregation's permission. I don't need the state of Florida's permission. I don't need the U.S. government's permission. Hell, I'm from Texas. If I have a right to do something, I don't need my mama's permission. I just do it. Likewise, if I have a duty to Nicole, it means I have to do it even if I don't want to. And if she can't compel me on her own to force me to do a duty, she can get the rest of society using the criminal justice system or the civil justice system to compel me to do it. It's a profound difference between rights and duties. And by the way, why do government have duties? Well, because under this framework, all the political power resides with the people, right? Because we're sovereign. However, we delegate a certain amount of our power to government. Well, how much power why would we delegate power to government? How much power would we do? Only enough for government to do the duties that we have already decided we want them to do. No more. Let me be clear about this. Under a functioning democratic republic, we the people should never be afraid of our government. In fact, the opposite is true. Government is supposed to be afraid of us. It's a completely different way of thinking about it. And I look at this and I think, this is brilliant. Straight up, folks, this is absolutely brilliant. I love this. We should try that in this country. I think it would work. And I'm not even joking. I mean, it's a great laugh line, it's a great applause line, but we should totally try this, because this is brilliant. And I'll tell you why I think it's brilliant. Because it understands that as an individual, that there is a level at which I am free and sovereign. Don't tread on me. You know, we are all kings and queens in our own right. Like, think of it this way. In my private capacity, I have certain rights that are inalienable. You cannot touch. Don't tread on me. But, so this satisfies my civil libertarian impulse. But unfortunately, so many of our capital L libertarian sisters and brothers stay focused only here. And they forget that even in this framework, there is a public component. So it satisfies my communitarian ethic as well. The understanding that when we're engaging in the body politic together, that there is a responsibility to one another. And that I can't just do anything I darn well please, because what I do is going to impact you, David, and it's going to impact Nicole, it's going to impact Steve and Kathy, and that therefore, when we're engaging in the public component, you know, collectively together, we've got to watch out for one another. So there's both a public and a private component. This is absolutely brilliant. And before I go one step further, waxing poetic about how brilliant the constitutional framework is, stop. And I have to ask you, in what year was the Constitution of the United States either originally drafted in convention or actually adopted and became the supreme law of the land? Either day. 1789. Good job, whoever that was. 1789, we got it. All right, good job. 1789 was when it was ratified, right? So in 1789, when this brilliant framework gets adopted, does anybody want to tell me who we the people were? Who were legally persons? Because think of it that way. The property owner. So first of all, you had to be a property owner. Yes, ma'am? White. You had to be white. You had to be a man. There's another. You had to be in the right religion. A lot of people forget that one. But to actually be enfranchised, so like here's the thing. If you actually take out the children for a moment, because you also had to be 18, I'm going to ask this question. So to actually be a person under law that could actually participate in this system, somebody tell me what percentage of the adult population you think was legally a person under this framework in 1789? 5%. I'll be darned. That's a low number. You surely are cynical. Who said 5%? Raise your hand. Ma'am, guess what? 5 to 8%. I can't believe that. Nobody ever comes in that low. She said, I'm not cynical. I've just been paying attention. Literally 5 to 8% of the adult population actually got to claim to be persons. No less a historian than Howard Zinn has said the entire history of the United States from one perspective could be understood as groups of people to drive themselves into the Constitution in order to be defined as persons under this framework. So let's be very clear about that. The founding of this country is actually a founding violence. It's clearly a founding violence against the indigenous people who were already here, who were subject to intentional, deliberate genocide. It is also a founding violence against those Africans who were brought at the edge of a knife or at the barrel of a gun, who were brought in chains, and the ones who built most of the infrastructure of this country. It's also a founding violence against women who were not legally persons. By the way, women were not persons, right? They were basically property. Like their entire legal relationship. And by the way, women, so can you imagine living in the society where the construct was that your entire legal relationship, you yourself, you couldn't own property, you were property. You couldn't engage in a contract. And there are actually cases on this, and the legal justification, because women didn't have the capacity to enter into a contract any more than a child would. And the court decisions were literally, women do not have the capacity, and they equated them with children. Can any of you even imagine that world? Right? I see all these heads shaking. That's a construct too, right? And so I underscore this, not so that we can because I'm a feminist. I don't think that we've reached the level of gender equity and fairness that I want to live in. But I'll tell you this, it's a damn sight different than that world, right? Because constructs changed, and thank goodness that women before us, and some men, but that women before us actually were willing to challenge those constructs when they were told it was. It is still true in other parts of the world today. Thank you for reminding us of that. So it's a founding violence also against the working class white people, right? I mean, this is the other thing. Like, you want to talk about the real amazing trick that the elites have pulled off is to use race and gender and class against us and to pit ourselves against one another. Because guess what? White people in general, now I assume that most of the white folks in here are maybe had thought a little deeper about this, but it really always gets me, all these white folks who are so, like they're proud of being white or something. That's stupid. Like really, white, what, pigment? You're proud of pigment? That's dumb. Like, please, you know what? You're making the rest of us with the same pigment as you look foolish. Stop being an idiot. It's like bald people. Stop the comb over. You make the rest of us bald men look bad. Am I right, Sandy? Just come on. Just embrace it. See the other bald man, right? Solidarity. White people, knock it off about white pride. Stop it. Shut up. It's dumb. It's dumb. If you want to be proud of something, research your own ethnicity and find out about the rich history of the Irish fighting for independence, or the Scotch fighting for independence, or frankly, anywhere in Europe, I promise you, you will go and find working class people fighting for justice and fairness. Be proud of that, not for pigment. The point is that most of the white working class men were actually not legally persons. So the real minority in this country is not women, for sure. It's not even people of color. The real minority in this country is about the 0.5% who owns every damn thing. And they're making all of the decisions, and isn't it a trick that they've somehow convinced us that they get to make all those rules and we're supposed to follow them? Now, some people might say, all right, Cobb, you got a scathing indictment about history. But, slavery is over, women have the right to vote, like we've solved all those problems. Now we have a functioning democracy. And I say, au contraire, mon frere. I ain't through. Because now it's time to reintroduce the modern corporation into this equation. And before we do that, I want to ask, does anybody know actually what it takes to actually create a corporation in the state of Florida today? $75, you file it with the state, and the Secretary of State, I think, is it in Florida, Secretary of State? Secretary of State will issue you a charter. And by the way, how long does that charter last? Forever. What are you allowed to do with your corporation? Anything that you're legally allowed to do. Now, that's today. Does anybody know what it took to create a corporation in 1789 and for the next 75 years in this country? Check this out. You had to get a bill introduced in the lower house of your state government. It had to pass by a majority. Then you had to get that same bill passed by a majority in the upper house. Then the governor had to sign it. So it was the functional equivalent of passing a law. A damn sight different than sending $75, right? Now, through that process, you had to prove, not just say, you had to prove that there was an existing public need that was not being met by existing governmental services or by existing private business, and that your corporation, if you were granted the privilege, not the right, but the privilege of incorporating, that you would satisfy that public need. And you had to pledge to always act in the public interest. And so when the charter came, if it came, if you were ever found to act outside the public interest, your corporate charter could be revoked like that. The corporate death penalty, in fact, was imposed with great frequency anytime any business that had a corporate charter acted outside the public interest. The charter was revoked. Oh, and by the way, how long could that corporation last? 10 years. And then, if you wanted another charter, you had to go through the whole process all over again. Now, let me tell you something. That is holding the corporation as an institution under check. That is what it would look like if we actually were going to have democratic control over the economics and the institutions of this country. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying this was the land of milk and honey for workers or women or people of color. I just point out that the corporation was tightly controlled. That's because the ruling elite used patriarchy and slavery and racism. They had other ways that they were actually extracting wealth. But what I'm pointing out is it is possible to imagine a society where corporations exist and are allowed to do business, but they are not allowed to hijack our government. And that's actually the role that the corporation played. This is not David Cobb's wishful thinking. This is not just the Green Party's platform, which it is. But this is our own history. Our history comes from not only a revolutionary history to oppose the monarchy, not only a people's uprising, but also our history includes a time period where the corporation was very tightly controlled. And so, before we put the corporation on this dichotomy, I mean, if I'm right about this slash, is it really important, the difference between rights and duties and being sovereign or subordinate? If I'm right about that, and I am, so if I'm right about that, it behooves us to ask, well, what side of the line should the corporation be on? Well, let's remember that a corporation is only created when the state, the government, issues its charter that charter can define what the duties are, what the corporation is allowed to do or not do, that it can be held accountable and in fact even revoked if they act outside the public interest, that the corporation is always supposed to act in the corporate interest. Can we all agree, by the way, then, under that circumstance, that the corporation really has to be on this side of the line, right? If we're going to have a functioning, thank you, Alan, if we're going to have it. So when the Supreme Court says no, a corporation is actually a person with rights, it perverts the entire constitutional framework. It makes it impossible for we the people to actually have a functioning democratic republic. Folks, corporate personhood is not just a legal doctrine or an idea. It's not just a theory. It is the linchpin by which the ruling elite have hijacked our government and are turning our government against us. And then anytime we try to exercise democratic control over these, the most powerful institutions the world has ever seen, corporate lawyers go into court and overturn the law. That's what it means. So frankly, I don't care what issue you care about. If you want to end war as foreign policy, if you want to see that every child has enough to eat, if you want to have clean air or clean water, if you care about workers' protection laws, every single one of those issues underneath it is impacted by and buttressed by the idea of corporations claiming constitutional rights. And I'm so glad that all of the groups that are supporting this, and by the way, can I just say how it warms my heart when I see progressive Democrats of all these different organizations and Green Party folks and election integrity people all working together. Give yourselves a round of applause for working together. Way to go. Way to go, Florida. So what I'm getting at is this, man. When corporations can claim that they are persons with constitutional rights, it means that we, the people, don't have the ability to create the society that we want. We have lost even the semblance of a democracy. We don't have a democratic republic. So when Move to Amend comes forward, now I'll be clear, I've been working on this for about 10, 15 years. Some of you who know me for a while know that some of this might actually sound familiar to you, some other things that I've done. But, you know, when I saw the case bubbling up the way that Nicole talked about, when David Swanson said, oh yeah, there's a response, that's because me and about 10 people said, oh my gosh, this is great. Why? Because I agree with Howard Zinn. Just before he died, Howard Zinn commented on Citizens United. And here's what he said. You know, liberals go apoplectic because they think, oh no, this is terrible. The rich and the ruling elite are using the legal system to capture our government. But Howard Zinn said, the reality is the ruling elite have always used the legal system. And they've always bought and paid for our elections. Howard Zinn said, actually, I think it's good that the Supreme Court has made explicit what was already happening. I'll say it another way. I welcome the clarity. Because this provides us with one of those real opportunities to say, which side are you on? You know, there's no, like, you are either for corporate personhood or against it, right? You can't be, like, and at the end of the day, this is what we need. And it moved to amend when by the way, the Supreme Court in Citizens United, catch this, they said that the McCain-Feingold campaign finance laws, they were anemic to begin with, right? Does anybody think that we had truly fair and publicly financed elections before in 2008? Anybody know how many $1 billion was spent in 2008 on federal elections alone? $5 billion. And the court said, oh my gosh, that's terrible. We're treating corporations, and I quote, like an oppressed minority. War is peace. Ignorance is strength. Right? That's 1984 stuff. I mean, like, that's crazy talk. That's lunacy. Corporations are oppressed minorities. That's outrageous. That's lunacy. That's crazy. And that's the reasoning that they used to overturn those to overturn that campaign finance law. But I want to be clear: at Move to Amend and the Green Party and Progressive Democrats of America and the Independent Progressive Politics Network and Democracy Unlimited and the 90,000 people who have joined this movement. We're not just saying we need corporate money out of elections. Yes, we need corporate money out of elections. But we need to abolish forever the idea that corporations can overturn any laws, right? They do not have the legitimate authority to go into court and overturn our democratically enacted laws. What helps us is to say, what's the plan of action? And why I'm so proud that Move to Amend has a very concrete action. Amend the Constitution. And you can help that right now simply by calling talk radio tomorrow and talking about corporate personhood and how outrageous it is. You can write a letter to the editor to your corporate newspaper right now. You can start going to candidate forums and ask the question, do you believe a corporation is a person with constitutional rights? My follow-up question, would you support a constitutional amendment to abolish the doctrine of corporate personhood? The fifth thing that you can do is run for office yourself. The sixth thing that you can do is start to support other candidates. In other words, we got to start acting like a movement, right? You know, and movements movements use all the tools in the toolbox. Nonviolent civil disobedience is one of them. You know, when I ran for president, my joke was I ran for president on my arrest record. I'm proud I've been to jail for justice. And real quick question, how many of you have been to jail for justice? All right, I see several hands go up. Y'all, is this true or not? Does that feel good? Right? Does it feel good? And going up to it the first time you did it, be honest, were you scared? Yes. Let me ask you this now. Are you willing to do it again? Yes. Man, I'm telling you, those of you who didn't raise your hands, look for the opportunity to engage in profound nonviolent civil disobedience. Your chest will poke out, your chin will go up, your shoulder will be back, and you will be a formidable citizen. Thank you so much for coming out. I'm David Cobb. Move to Amend.org. Peace. Thank you. Thank you so much.